Hello everyone and welcome to episode 17 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing my top 4 ways to break through a fat loss plateau. Now before we dive into the podcast, I think it's important just to realise and appreciate that a plateau is part of the fat loss process. This is just your body's way of adapting. Therefore, I think firstly it's important to note that these plateaus where your progress just stalls, you stop making fat loss progress, is just a normal part of the process. And this is something I always have to keep reminding some of my online clients, my personal training clients as well, is just appreciate this is part of the process. This is our cue to essentially make a change to continue making progress. But it would be naive to believe that, just say for example you're going from 20% body fat to sub 10% body fat, that you're not going to see plateaus along the way. It's just part of the process, and especially within the context of how I suggest you go about your fat loss phase, which is with the caveat of trying to maintain as much muscle as possible. Therefore by default you're almost inviting plateaus, in the sense that because we're trying to keep our caloric intake as high as possible, trying to do as minimal cardio as possible, because we're trying to keep the foundation of our training as the weight training. We're trying not to impede that weight training, that maintenance of strength throughout the fat loss phase. So that's why we have calories as high as possible and do minimal cardio, because obviously by doing too much cardio and reducing calories too quickly, we impede that weight training, which is at the top of our hierarchy of importance. Will then start losing strength and thus therefore lose muscle mass a lot quicker. So hopefully that makes sense, and I discuss that more in detail in some of my other episodes. So first we need to realise that we need to ask the question, have we actually met a fat loss plateau? Are you actually tracking? Are you actually tracking the food intake how suggested using MyFitnessPal? Are you measuring your body weight at least once a week? Are you taking body fat testing if you have this available to you? Are you using a measuring tape to measure various body parts? Are you using photos to see changes each and every week? Because if you're not using those tools, you're really guessing, and that's not a good place to be, purely because, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, our goal is to lose body fat while doing as little cardio as possible, while eating as much food as possible. Therefore, if you're guessing whether you've hit a plateau or not, potentially you could drop food intake sooner than you'd need to do, or increase cardio sooner than you need to do, purely because you weren't tracking. So hopefully that makes sense. That needs to be the foundation first. You need to actually be tracking your progress, and then you could be objective when you actually reach a plateau, when your fat loss progress stalls, then you can make a change. So as I discussed in some other episodes, realistic body weight changes per week are around 0.5 to 1% body weight loss per week, and this isn't black and white. However, this is a good ballpark figures to work from. And obviously if you're more of an overweight individual, so someone well above 20% body fat for males and above 25% body fat for females, you probably want to be aiming on the higher end to 1% per week. And as you get leaner, as you become under 15% body fat for males and below 20% body fat for females, about 0.5% weight loss per week is going to be a good target to aim for. This is just obviously because there's now less total body weight to lose, therefore the rate of progress is obviously going to slow. Now, big caveat for females, as I've discussed in some other episodes, measuring the body weight change is still useful to use. You need to have an understanding that obviously due to their menstrual cycle they'll hold water at certain times of the month, and therefore this can play havoc with the scale. Essentially the scale weight could be the same, but because they're holding water they could actually be seeing fat loss progress, but the scale weight is masking this progress. So I'd use the scale weight with a degree of caution, try to be objective. I would still suggest tracking weekly, but at the same time you need to just be aware of certain times of the month where you are holding more water, so then you could be objective Otherwise, you may be measuring yourself at one point in the month where you're holding more water compared to another time in the month where you're not holding as much water. So as discussed on some of our other podcasts, number one rule of fat loss is the law of thermodynamics. Essentially, we need to be within an energy deficit over a period of time to see fat loss progress. So essentially, we need to be burning more calories than we're consuming. Now, it's not just about calories. We need to make sure we're also consuming sufficient protein as well. So I think where a lot of people go wrong, they just see calories as calories, where we still need to have certain macronutrient principles in place. So essentially, protein needs to be set sufficiently. We also need to do the most minimal change possible to get the maximum result. Let me repeat that again. We need to do the minimal change possible to get the maximal result. So just remind you back to the start of the episode, we want to maintain our gym performance, our strength in the gym. Therefore, by doing any drastic cuts in calories and any drastic increases in energy expenditure via cardio are going to potentially impede that weight training performance. Therefore, we're going to see some bigger losses in strength and therefore muscle mass. Therefore, we need to make small changes, measure progress. If we see progress, we'll continue doing that. If we don't, then we'll make another small change. But you really want to keep that in your head, smallest change possible to get the maximum result. However, contrary to that above statement, we're also a slave to the deadline, in the sense that if you've got a holiday coming up, or you're competing at a show, or you've got an event, or we have a certain deadline, we're a slave to that deadline, and that will essentially dictate the aggressiveness of the energy deficit. So despite my above statements to say we need to make as minimal changes as possible, essentially what I'm saying is make sure you give yourself enough time so then you can make those minimal changes and see progress. However, at the same time, we're still a slave to that deadline. It could be 12 weeks away, we need to get to a certain point, and therefore, because of that, we may need to reduce calories even further than we normally would do, and or increase expenditure even more than we normally would do. So that's just an important consideration. We're always a slave to the deadline. So the 4 changes. The first one, very simply, decrease calories. Protein is going to stay pretty constant for the most part throughout the fat loss phase, and therefore you're making the reductions from fats or carbohydrates or a combination of both. Now, this isn't black and white, whether you choose one or the other. This can be down to a number of things. For the most part, I like keeping carbohydrates a little bit higher, in the sense that this can help with maintaining gym performance. It can help with maintaining strength in the gym. However, more likely it's going to be a combination of both. So I suggest making anywhere between a 3 to 10% reduction in total calories. Protein can stay the same, so we're making this from carbohydrates or fats or a combination of both. That's just a good ballpark place to work from. It really depends on the individual. When I'm working with coaching clients and personal training clients, it really does depend on so many factors. 1, their macronutrient intake as it is. 2, their preference. 3, trying to look at maintaining strength in the gym. But hopefully I'll give you just a ballpark place to work from. Second way to bust through a fat loss plateau is increasing expenditure via cardio. So weight training is going to pretty much stay the same. Within the fat loss phase, there'll be slightly less volume than the muscle gaining phase because we don't have as many calories to recover from sufficiently. But the changes to expenditure will be through cardio. So this could be adding a small HIIT session, so high intensity interval training. I've discussed this in detail in some of my other episodes. Or a LIST session, so low intensity steady state. Essentially, you're adding something within your week with the goal of expending more calories. That's the goal of these. It's just a tool to further expend calories. Okay. And again, go back to that previous statement. We're trying to make the minimal change possible for the maximal result. So I suggest if you are going to add a cardio session, just add 1 session. Make it relatively small. It could even be a 10-minute HIIT session. It could be a 20-minute LIST session. It really depends, again, on so many factors. And also, again, we're a slave to that deadline. So that deadline will potentially dictate the length and duration and frequency of those cardio sessions. So they're the 2 main ways to bust through the fat loss plateau. There's two more, however these are slightly different in the sense that the above two are acutely going to bust through that fat loss plateau, whereas these two are almost negating some of the negative effects of dieting, which therefore will help with fat loss in the long term. And the first one is a refeed day, so a higher carbohydrate refeed day. And it's important to know that this would be only needed for a lean individual, so someone probably for males under around 13% body fat, females under 20%, and essentially the goal is to negate some of those physiological adaptations to dieting. So for example, leptin will obviously drop during the fat loss phase. A high carb day will help increase this, can replenish glycogen, which can help with gym sessions on that day and for the following days, and also just gives you a psychological break from dieting just for that one day, and then you're going to go back to dieting calories and macronutrients. The refeed day, again, it really depends, but you could probably bring it back to maintenance calories or even slightly above, back to your gaining phase carbohydrate figures, so somewhere in between the two. Again, really depends on the person. So the fourth and final one is what's called a diet break, and again, this is not going to acutely affect fat loss, but it can help with fat loss in the long run. And essentially it's a tool which I learned from Lyle McDonald, and essentially talks about this diet break where you have essentially a period of time where you bring your calories slowly back to maintenance figures, and again the goal is to negate some of the negative effects of diet and bring up them physiological adaptations, for example leptin, give your metabolic rate a short-term boost again, and this could be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. For most individuals this really isn't necessary, however someone who's been dieting for a long period of time, this can be a useful tool for that individual. So hopefully you found this useful. So just give you some conclusions and applications. Make sure you're tracking your food intake, make sure you're tracking your progress, because otherwise you don't know whether you've hit a fat loss plateau or not. Only make a change when needed. Remember, we're trying to create as minimal change as possible to get the maximum result. We're trying to preserve that weight training performance. Therefore, only make small changes either to cardio and or food intake. Either by reducing food intake and or increasing cardio. Refeed days will be needed potentially for a leaner individual. The frequency will depend on a lot of factors as well. So this could be once a week, this could be twice a week, could be 3 times a week. It's difficult to give some black and white figures. And also got this potential for a diet break for someone who's been dieting for a long period of time. However, that one really isn't needed for most individuals. Then once you've made any of the above changes, you're then going to remeasure your progress, and then you're going to repeat that cycle. So it's a constant phase and cycle of putting something in place, making a change, measuring that progress. Then if you need to, e.g. if you hit another fat loss plateau, you need to make another change, and or if you keep seeing progress, keep doing what you're doing until you hit another fat loss plateau. So just realise that fat loss plateaus are part of the dieting process. See it as a cue for you to then make a change. Don't see it as a negative, just see it as a cue to make a change and then make that change. Okay, thank you very much guys for listening. Hopefully you've really been enjoying all these episodes. I've really enjoyed making them. Also, if you're still yet to download my free book, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, there's a tab at the top of the page called free book. Click on that and that can be downloaded immediately. Okay, thank you very much guys. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.